Joining us here in Washington is the director of the Brazil Institute at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Paulo Sotero. With us from Brazil is João Ferreira Jr. He's a political science professor with the Institute of Social and Political Studies at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. Also joining us here in Washington is Mark Langevin. He's the director of BrazilWorks, a US-based consulting firm which offers strategic advice in Brazil and the United States. And with us from Sao Paulo is Rogério Checker. He's a founding member of Vem pra Rua, or Come to the Streets, part of the protest movement in Brazil. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Paulo, as we just heard from our correspondent, the Petrobras energy scandal is playing a central role in these protests against President Rousseff. But the country's economy is also facing serious problems. So the question is, how serious is this challenge to the president?
Oh, very major, serious challenge, because obviously the Petrobras has a systemic effect in the Brazilian economy, and the economy obviously is going through a serious slump now. I think the president has already found the way out of this in terms of, what is the plan, what are the policies. It's a 180 turn in economic policy. That's what she did when she nominated Joaquim Levy to be the Minister of Finance, and it's now a matter of implementation. It looks like that the pieces started to come together in Congress for the approval of the very, very unpleasant austerity measures that have to go through now.
Dr. Ferreira, the president's approval ratings right now are around 13%. Why are Brazilians so unhappy with her leadership?
I think it's a mix of things. It's a mix of, for example, of the economy that's not doing so well, but it's also a product of the heavy, media campaign against the president that was waged during the elections, and now after the elections, it's even stronger. There's a strong media bias against the president, and I think that also impacts her popularity.
Mark, Paulo brings up an interesting point here that the president is taking a 180-degree turn, as he points out, to correct these problems that she's having in the country. What will her constituency say about this?
Well, I think we all knew it was coming. The constituency is a bit mixed, but obviously those that might suffer the most, some of the organizations that represent public sector workers, some of the pensioners, and so forth, they're going to be going to the streets as well and countering these. But I think there is a middle point, a point of consensus, and as João mentioned, it's really up to the executive to mobilize Congress to adopt these measures and to adopt them in an effective way, that the sequencing of the fiscal adjustment takes place without undue harm to the most precarious citizens, and continuing long-term investments in the economic, physical, social infrastructure of the country. So she needs to put a face on that. May not be Dilma herself, but somebody from the administration needs to step up, talk to her base, her constituency, lead them, and also lead Congress towards a consensus framework for dealing with the fiscal adjustment as well as the anti-corruption measures.
Rogério, you are one of the protest organizers. What are you hoping will come out of these protests? And at this stage, are you satisfied with the measures the government has been taking?
So what we are hoping is that the president and the government start acting much more in line with the promises that were made, and with more respect for the people and the society. This society cannot take any more lies, cannot take any more promises that are not delivered. They are totally tired of higher taxes that are not reverted for the sake of the people. And this is getting to such levels of dissatisfaction that people don't know what to do anymore but to scream. So that it is extremely important that if the government is willing to bridge this gap between how the society is looking at them, and even I think that will have positive consequences for the Congress, is that to start to deliver what they promised, it starts to be more ethical, and it starts to bring much more forceful actions for combating corruption, because what they have been doing is just to bringing old projects of laws that are trying to aim corruption, but keeping the same people who are the core of the problem in their posts and in their seats.
Paulo, do you agree that the change doesn't go far enough?
Well, the change is a very tough one, and it's difficult to implement because it was not, the people was not prepared for the change during a presidential election campaign that was very tough. We just had it. So after the people re-elected President Dilma Rousseff by a very short margin of 3%, the people were informed that we have to make this major correction in the economy that was not discussed. So this makes it that much more difficult to explain to implement this. Now, to go to João Ferre's point, and I think it's important, yes, most of the media in Brazil has been very critical of presidential policies. This is the normal debate, but there is one new information that's very important. The media people inside Palácio do Planalto, the presidential palace, that are in charge of framing media messages, wrote an internal memo where they describe the situation in Brazil, incorrectly in my view, as political chaos. When you have working for you media people that think like that, obviously it makes the president's task that more difficult.
Dr. Ferreira, I'm wondering if you could address that problem that Paulo Sotero points out. And one other thing I want to ask you, and that is, broadly speaking, are we seeing here an ideological battle between, let's say, elements that are more progressive, socialist-oriented, against more pro-market supporters?
Well, we were talking about politics, and I think that, is one of the main games of politics in Brazil and elsewhere. And I think that also when you talk about the people over here, you have to make clear that, there are different conceptions, because the people who went to the protest on March the 15th were mostly, 83% of them, as a newspaper footage São Paulo showed, were voters of Aécio Neves, opposition voters, plus, voters of other candidates. So people who voted for Dilma did not go to the protests. And so there's the satisfaction, overall dissatisfaction with the policies, but you cannot confuse that with people going to the streets and parading against the president because of that. And I think that another distinction that has to be made is that, after the election, Dilma is playing the congressional, the parliamentary game of politics. And that I'm sure I concur with the idea that, I don't remember who said that she has to play that game and she has to, concoct a majority in Congress in order to get past her policies. And that's a quite different game from the popularity game that she's being pushed into by this kind of media campaign or the protest of the 15th March campaign. Because, that's a post-electoral game that still calls her to play according to electoral rules. And I think she, wants to be past that in order to be able to concoct this majority and enact policy.
Rogério, we've heard a lot about the problems that the president faces and also her shortcomings. But what if we look at the achievements of the Workers' Party in Brazil? Extreme poverty in Brazil has gone down 75% since she came to power. The minimum wage has doubled in the last 12 years. And workers at the lower end now enjoy some benefits, things like paid vacations.
The problem is that, so that we need to find out if that is sustainable or not. And what we are already finding out is that that is not. What is actually happening now is that the government is a victim of its own device right now. They implemented an extremely loose monetary policy in the past 4 years. They spent much more than they should in terms of the incredible revenues that they were already bringing from the higher commodity prices from the previous years, and they did not think about the future. What happened is that they were always blaming the international crisis for what was happening. The international crisis went away, and the problems continue. Right now, what they did is, after the problems with the monetary policy of lack of control in inflation, now they have to implement these strong measures because of the actions that they had in the past 4 and actually 8 to 12 years. So they put themselves in a situation that now they're trying to toll the society to correct they cannot hide behind the problem, not taking ownership of that right now.
Okay, Mark, I want to get your views on these issues coming up next, but we're going to have to take a break first. When we come back, more on the problems facing Brazil. Stay tuned. You're watching The Heat.